The summer of 2003 carried on in Ohio much like any other. Streets bustled with routine, and the hum of daily life seemed untouched by larger worries. Yet on one quiet morning, a phone call into the local police department unsettled that balance. A respected physician named Dr. Paul Mercer had not shown up for his scheduled appointments. The absence was unusual for a man whose reputation rested on punctuality and reliability. His vehicle remained parked behind his modest clinic, but no one could find him inside. Doors were locked, windows secure, and nothing pointed immediately to distress. That puzzle of someone vanishing from a familiar place without a trace lingered heavy in the early reports. Detectives noted the eerie absence of disturbance. Records from that day listed patients he was expected to see, but each one left puzzled when the clinic failed to open. The paradox became clear. How could a man arrive at work, leave his car, and then seemingly dissolve into nothing? In those first hours, police assured the family that answers were likely close. As the morning turned to evening, however, the unease spread. What began as delay started to look like disappearance. The first people to feel the weight of his absence were his patients. Many relied on him for steady care, and they spoke of his predictable habits. That stability formed the heart of his reputation in the town of Fairview. To see his car waiting yet doors unopened contradicted everything people knew about him. Investigators soon canvassed nearby shops and neighboring offices, asking whether anyone had glimpsed him that morning. A few clerks remembered him arriving just after 7, locking his car, and carrying a small leather satchel inside. Beyond that, no one could place him again. The contradictions deepened when security cameras from across the street confirmed his arrival but showed no departure. Frames rolled forward minute by minute, but he never appeared walking back outside. Police were left explaining a troubling question to his wife and 2 grown children. He had entered the building, yet no one could say how or when he left. That simple contradiction, clear as daylight, unsettled investigators more than any clear sign of crime would have. The foundation of a mystery was set before anyone realized its gravity. News of the missing doctor reached wider circles quickly, not with shock, but with quiet disbelief. Fairview was a town where routines were rarely broken. Paul Mercer embodied that rhythm. He volunteered at local health fairs, attended community events, and walked home most evenings by the same route. A man like that did not simply fail to appear. The town square buzzed with speculation and hushed voices. Was he called away suddenly? Did he fall ill inside? Each theory folded back on the central fact. He had gone into the building and had not come out. For officers leading the search, the lack of disturbance meant evidence would be hard to come by. No forced entry, no sign of struggle, no misplaced belongings other than the satchel that could not be located. Without those markers, reports from that first day read thin, filled with careful observations but little direction. Yet each line documented the one truth no one could deny. A man's life had broken from its track, and his community was left to fill silence with questions. It was only the beginning. Paul Mercer's story began far from headlines. Born in 1964 in a nearby Ohio county, he grew up in a middle-class family with steady routines. Friends from childhood remembered him as soft-spoken, preferring books and quiet walks to louder pursuits. Medicine was an early interest, sparked by volunteering at a local nursing home in his teenage years. He pursued that path with determination, attending state university and later completing medical training without fanfare. By the time he established his practice in Fairview, his colleagues saw him as dependable, not ambitious. He valued familiarity, choosing to remain close to family rather than seek larger hospitals in distant cities. That choice shaped his identity as the community's physician. He never advertised, yet word of mouth filled his appointment books. His patients spoke of a calm presence, someone who listened without hurry. Over the years, those qualities turned him from an ordinary doctor into a quiet fixture in town life. When he vanished, the contrast between his careful history and the sudden disappearance unsettled even those who had barely known him. To understand the mystery, investigators first anchored themselves in the life he had built. Fairview itself set the backdrop for the unfolding events. Nestled among stretches of farmland and slow-moving rivers, it was the sort of town where change rarely rushed. Streets lined with modest shops closed early in the evenings, and most residents knew each other by name. The clinic stood near the center, a simple brick building with a sign that had not changed in 2 decades. Inside, Framed certificates hung neatly behind the front desk, and worn chairs carried the imprint of countless waiting patients. To those who entered, it was more than a workplace. It felt like part of the town's rhythm, steady and familiar. The people who lived there valued continuity, and Mercer's clinic embodied it. That sense of stability made the mourning of his absence harder to comprehend. In a place where even minor disruptions drew attention, his unexplained silence spread quickly. Rumors swirled, but none felt convincing. The scene lacked the drama of crime, yet carried the weight of impossibility. For investigators, the small scale of the town both helped and hindered. Everyone had observations, but none offered clarity. The calm fabric of Fairview made the rupture feel sharper. Among his family, memories painted a portrait of a measured man. His wife, Ellen, described their marriage as steady rather than dramatic. They raised 2 children who had already left for college by the time of his disappearance. At home, Paul kept routines as carefully as he did at work. Dinner at 7, reading before bed, church on Sundays. He preferred quiet evenings to travel, and he rarely stayed out late. Family photos showed the same pattern: modest gatherings, small celebrations, nothing extravagant. Ellen later told interviewers that he was a man of habits, and those habits made his sudden absence impossible to fit into context. Police interviewed relatives within hours, hoping for insight into stress or conflict. They found little. Finances were sound, relationships intact, and no recent arguments stood out. That lack of turbulence left detectives circling back to the clinic. The life they examined revealed no shadows, no debts, and no entanglements that might have explained a vanishing. For his family, the comfort of knowing he lived without turmoil became its own pain. If nothing was wrong, then where could he have gone? That unanswered question lingered. The timeline leading to the disappearance became the next anchor. On Monday, June 16, 2003, Mercer's day began like many others. Neighbors reported seeing him leave home around 6:30 in the morning, dressed in his usual pressed shirt and jacket. He carried the same leather satchel he always took to work, filled with notes and patient files. Traffic cameras placed his car entering Fairview's main street shortly after 7. By 7:15, he parked behind the clinic, locking the doors as routine. A delivery driver remembered seeing him unlock the clinic's back entrance and step inside. Those are the final confirmed movements. From that moment forward, no verified sightings placed him anywhere. The patient schedule listed 10 names for that day. Each arrived expecting the usual rhythm. At 8 o'clock, when doors remained locked, confusion turned to concern. By 9, calls reached the local police. Officers arrived to find the car still in place, with no sign of forced entry. Inside, nothing appeared disturbed. The satchel, however, was missing. The record showed a man walking into his office, yet never leaving again. That unbroken chain of evidence confounded investigators from the start. Officers traced the hours surrounding his last appearance with care. Phone records revealed his last outgoing call was placed at 6:45 that morning to confirm a delivery of medical supplies. The supplier confirmed the brief conversation and said nothing seemed unusual. No further calls were made from his phone, and no bank activity occurred after that morning. Interviews with nearby shopkeepers revealed no further sightings beyond the early arrival. Security footage from a neighboring pharmacy covered the street in front of the clinic from dawn to dusk. Mercer's car was visible the entire day, untouched until police later secured it. Investigators inspected the locks on the clinic. All were intact, with no evidence of tampering. Windows were locked from the inside, and blinds remained undisturbed. The lack of disturbance narrowed the possibilities. Either he had left through some unnoticed path, or he remained inside beyond detection. Forensic teams dusted surfaces and collected fibers, but initial results provided no clear direction. Each item cataloged served to reinforce the same baffling fact. The man had walked in, yet never walked back out. That contradiction grew harder to dismiss. By midday, concern spread into alarm. Calls circulated among his patients, many of whom had known him for years. Several drove past the clinic multiple times, hoping to see lights on or the door open. Family members arrived by afternoon, urging police to expand their search. Detectives walked through the building once again, opening closets, checking storage rooms, and even the basement. Nothing unusual appeared. A half-finished cup of coffee rested on his desk, still faintly warm when first discovered. The medical charts for that day were laid out in order, suggesting he had been preparing for appointments as normal. That image clashed with the silence that followed. Officers marked the time carefully. From 7:15 onward, no one entered or left by any visible route. By evening, news reached local television, where anchors reported the mystery with restrained voices. The town watched with disbelief as camera crews filmed the quiet brick clinic bathed in police lights. Behind those images, families waited for clarity that would not come quickly. Each passing hour without explanation deepened the mystery, transforming absence into something more permanent. The timeline offered clarity only in how abruptly it ended. The first phase of the search began within hours. By the morning after Mercer failed to appear, police had sealed off the clinic and begun a full sweep. Officers marked entry points, photographed interiors, and logged every item left on desks or shelves. A checklist ensured that nothing went unrecorded. Cabinets held the expected medical files, each in alphabetical order. Supplies stood stacked neatly, and nothing suggested a hurried departure. Outside, cadaver dogs circled the property. They picked up his scent near the parking lot and confirmed it led inside the clinic. But then the trail stopped cold. That abrupt end mirrored what cameras had already shown. Mercer went in, yet he did not emerge. By midweek, the county sheriff expanded the search to nearby fields and wooded lots. Dozens of volunteers joined, combing through grass and underbrush in long lines. Still, no trace appeared. The contrast was hard to ignore. A man known by so many had vanished in broad daylight, and all the orderly methods of search produced only the same silence. Records from those days show frustration building, yet investigators pressed forward, determined not to let routine gaps explain away a person's disappearance. As days turned to weeks, investigators retraced their steps. They revisited patient lists, calling each individual scheduled for June 16th. Every account confirmed the same: doors locked, no sign of activity, growing confusion. They checked hospital admissions, motels, even bus and train stations. No records matched Mercer's description. Forensic testing on the clinic itself brought no breakthroughs. Dusting for prints revealed only the doctor's own and those of staff members. No foreign fingerprints appeared on doorknobs, desks, or medical equipment. Fiber analysis added little, showing nothing inconsistent with routine clinic use. A sweep for surveillance cameras in surrounding blocks produced a few additional angles, but none captured movement out of the clinic. Detectives found themselves circling the same paradox. On paper, the investigation looked thorough. Each step followed procedure, each lead pursued. Yet the conclusion remained unchanged. A respected physician had entered his workplace and never emerged. It was not for lack of effort, but lack of evidence. That gap weighed heavily on the team, reminding them of the limits of method when confronted with pure absence. Family members pressed for answers daily. His wife Ellen attended briefings, sitting quietly as officers recited findings that offered no closure. She later described the experience as hearing the same story told repeatedly with no new ending. Detectives explained each effort: the searches, the interviews, the checks of financial and phone records. Each measure confirmed normalcy, never disruption. Friends organized vigils on the courthouse steps, lighting candles in rows that stretched into the night. Reporters filmed the gatherings, their coverage restrained but persistent. In Fairview, the disappearance became the central topic, spoken in careful tones in shops and diners. The absence of scandal left only bewilderment. Police avoided speculation, repeating that no evidence suggested foul play, but no evidence pointed to voluntary disappearance either. That balance frustrated the family most of all. They wanted certainty, yet officers could offer none. By the end of the summer, the case file had grown thick with logs and forms, yet thin with answers. Mercer's name remained active on the missing persons registry, but in the hearts of those closest to him, the sense of waiting began to stretch unbearably long. As the years rolled forward, silence replaced urgency. The initial search exhausted itself within the first 12 months. Beyond that, activity slowed to periodic checks. Detectives revisited the file annually, looking for details overlooked in the rush of those early weeks. Nothing new surfaced. For the community, the unanswered disappearance became part of the town's story, referenced but rarely discussed in detail. At vigils, speakers reminded each other of Mercer's role, but over time attendance dwindled. Fairview, like any small town, learned to fold absence into routine. The clinic building remained closed for years, its brick walls weathering but intact. Weeds grew near the parking lot where his car had once sat, yet the structure became a landmark of what had been lost. Ellen moved to a smaller home outside town, carrying memories but rarely speaking to press. His children completed their studies and built lives away from Fairview, though they returned occasionally to honor anniversaries. Local papers ran short pieces each June, summarizing the unsolved mystery, but even those grew briefer. What once felt urgent faded into a quiet, unresolved chapter, lodged in memory but starved of answers. Still, reminders surfaced unexpectedly. In 2007, a church group gathering at the courthouse lawn once again lit candles in his name. Younger residents, who had only been children at the time, asked their parents about the doctor who vanished. Stories passed down in fragments. A kind man, steady in his practice, gone without explanation. A mural downtown even incorporated his likeness, not as portrait, but as symbol of lives left unfinished. Police occasionally followed up on tips phoned in, though most proved vague or unreliable. One caller claimed to have seen him at a rest stop across the state border, but records confirmed no link. Each lead reinforced the same pattern, fragments without foundation. The town's relationship with the case shifted from hope of resolution to quiet endurance. Mercer's name lingered like a shadow at community events, spoken softly, never with scandal. In interviews years later, residents admitted they had grown to live with uncertainty. The case had become not just about one man, but about the endurance of questions in a place built on stability. That endurance would matter when the silence finally broke. By 2012, nearly a decade had passed without progress. Yet anniversaries continued to draw small gatherings, often at the church or the courthouse. Family members spoke less often, but when they did, they emphasized the need for remembrance. Detectives who had long since rotated to other duties occasionally revisited the file. The clinic remained a physical reminder, boarded but still standing. Its presence carried weight, a daily marker for those who passed it on their way to work. Few entered, and over time dust covered the windows, further muting its story. Still, on evenings when light hit the building just so, residents said it seemed to invite questions all over again. That persistence of memory mattered, because it kept the case from vanishing entirely into obscurity. Unlike many unsolved disappearances, Mercer's story retained a foothold in the town's consciousness. It was neither an obsession nor forgotten lore, but a steady current under the surface. That balance, silence paired with remembrance, ensured that when a chance discovery arrived, there were still those who recognized its significance. Memory had preserved the ground for what evidence would later confirm. The break came not through chance, but routine maintenance. In the spring of 2015, the clinic building was finally sold to a development company planning renovation. As crews entered for inspection, they found the interior largely as it had been left. Dust layered across furniture, papers still stacked where they had once been sorted. In the process of clearing storage, workers accessed a crawlspace above a ceiling panel near the rear of the clinic. Inside, they discovered a small compartment that had gone unnoticed during earlier searches. Within it lay Mercer's leather satchel, intact though weathered by time. Inside were handwritten notes, patient charts, and a set of keys belonging to the clinic. The discovery reignited attention immediately. Police secured the scene, treating the building once again as active evidence. Forensic teams, armed with newer technology than had existed a decade earlier, began a fresh sweep. The satchel became a central piece, not only because it had been missing, but because its location raised new questions. How had it arrived in the hidden space? And why had it gone undetected in the early searches? Answers, long dormant, finally began to stir. Advances in forensic testing made a difference. Fibers collected from the satchel revealed traces of materials not common to the clinic, specifically, insulation fibers matching the crawlspace itself. That indicated the bag had been placed intentionally, not lost by accident. Even more telling were fingerprints lifted from inside the compartment. While many matched Mercer himself, 2 prints did not. They belonged to a former clinic employee, a maintenance worker who had left the job shortly before the disappearance. Records showed he had been responsible for minor repairs, including ceiling panels. At the time, his departure had seemed routine, and he was never considered central to the investigation. Yet the prints, preserved and now identifiable with updated databases, shifted the focus. Detectives reopened the case formally, assigning a new team to pursue leads with fresh energy. Interviews began again, with attention to old staff members, former patients, and the worker in question. For the first time in over a decade, the file showed momentum. Questions once buried in silence returned to the forefront, supported now by tangible evidence. The investigation had regained its footing. Community reaction to the discovery reflected both relief and unease. Residents who had lived with uncertainty for 12 years suddenly saw activity at the boarded clinic. News crews returned, documenting forensic teams carrying boxes and equipment in and out. For many, the satchel symbolized more than an object. It represented proof that the mystery had not been forgotten, that persistence could still yield results. Family members, cautious after years of disappointment, spoke carefully. Ellen expressed gratitude for renewed efforts, but stopped short of speculation. Detectives, likewise, remained measured, emphasizing that evidence must guide conclusions. Yet privately, many admitted the significance. The satchel's hidden placement suggested intention, and the fingerprints pointed directly to someone who had once moved freely through the building. That shift reframed the case, turning it from a puzzle of disappearance into an investigation of responsibility. The town, once accustomed to silence, now felt the return of quiet anticipation. For the first time in years, it seemed possible that answers might arrive, not from speculation, but from the careful reassembly of facts. The long wait had given way to cautious hope. Investigators now approached the case with structured focus. They built what they called a lattice of contacts, diagramming every known connection Mercer had maintained. Patient records were reviewed once more, with names flagged for further checks. Colleagues from the hospital and clinic were re-interviewed, though most had long since moved on. Family members provided timelines of visits and phone calls from the weeks preceding the disappearance. Nothing immediately indicated tension. Financial records remained stable, showing no sudden withdrawals or hidden debts. The absence of anomalies made the lattice broad but unfocused. Still, mapping relationships served a purpose. It created a framework where even faint irregularities could be spotted. Detectives charted business associates, noting former contractors, suppliers, and staff. They added social contacts, including neighbors and acquaintances from church. Each connection was checked against police and employment records. Though nothing leapt out at first, the lattice provided investigators with a more comprehensive picture than had existed in 1998. Where the original file contained lists, the new team now had visual links. That broader structure allowed them to see not just individuals, but patterns of interaction. It was from within this network that one lead eventually emerged. The network analysis revealed an overlooked conflict. Buried in courthouse records was a civil case filed shortly before Mercer's disappearance. The case involved a dispute with his former clinic partner, a man named Daniel Crane. At the time, the matter concerned ownership shares and revenue division. According to filings, Mercer had sought to retain controlling interest, while Crane argued for equal authority. The proceedings were in motion when Mercer vanished, yet within a year, the case was quietly settled. Crane assumed full ownership of his share without further challenge. On its own, the record did not prove connection. Business disputes occur frequently and often resolve without deeper meaning. Still, investigators considered the timing difficult to ignore. Interviews with staff from that period recalled tension between the two men. One described the atmosphere as strained during meetings, though professional in public. Detectives noted the potential motive: financial stability gained by one party through the unexplained absence of the other. While not definitive, the discovery provided a direction. Crane, long absent from Fairview, would need to be contacted again. The team understood that time complicates memory, but documents provided something more reliable than recollection. Re-establishing contact with Crane required patience. By 2012, he was living several counties away, working in a different field entirely. Detectives arranged an interview, framing it as part of a comprehensive review. Crane appeared cooperative, presenting an alibi that placed him at a family gathering on the night Mercer vanished. On the surface, his account seemed consistent. Yet technology now offered checks unavailable in the late 90s. Phone records, preserved by service providers, revealed details not previously examined. Data showed a call made from Crane's phone near the clinic around 9:30 that evening. The record contradicted his statement of being elsewhere. When presented with this, Crane explained he had briefly driven by to collect materials, insisting the timing was coincidence. Investigators logged the inconsistency carefully, noting it for further review. Though not conclusive, the details shifted Crane from peripheral figure to central person of interest. The lattice, once diffuse, had narrowed toward a single line. With new tools and old evidence combined, detectives sensed that a breakthrough was approaching. They prepared the case file for potential prosecutorial review, knowing one strong connection could alter everything. The turning point arrived in 2014. State laboratories completed testing on preserved items collected years earlier, but not fully analyzed until technology improved. Among them was the coffee mug found in Mercer's kitchen, sealed since the original investigation. Advanced DNA profiling isolated material not belonging to Mercer or his family. The result matched Daniel Crane. This link could not be explained as incidental. Records confirmed Crane had left the clinic months before the disappearance, and he had no documented reason to be inside Mercer's home. Investigators verified chain of custody thoroughly to ensure no contamination. The results held. The mug became the strongest physical connection in the case. Prosecutors reviewed the evidence and agreed it met standards for action. After years of uncertainty, the investigation had produced a tangible link between Mercer's disappearance and a man once tied to him by business, but not by friendship. For the first time, detectives could speak of direction with confidence. They prepared arrest warrants quietly, determined to move without spectacle. A case long defined by absence now possessed something definitive, a trace left behind that science could not dismiss. The arrest itself unfolded without incident. Officers approached Crane's residence in early morning hours, minimizing public attention. Reports described the process as orderly. Crane opened the door, listened as the warrant was read, and complied without resistance. He was transported to the county facility for booking, charged with homicide and tampering with evidence. Press briefings followed, though carefully measured. The sheriff emphasized that the arrest resulted from patient, years-long effort, and cautioned that charges did not equal conviction. Still, the tone suggested quiet confidence. News outlets across Ohio reported the development, often summarizing Mercer's story for audiences unfamiliar with its history. For Fairview, the effect was immediate. After 16 years of silence, the town once again found itself the focus of attention. Residents expressed a mixture of surprise and relief. Some said they had long suspected Crane. Others admitted they had doubted the case would ever move forward. Through it all, officials maintained a tone of restraint, careful not to ignite speculation before the courts could speak. Community response revealed divided emotions. For many, the arrest provided relief that the mystery had not been abandoned. Families who had gathered at vigils over the years spoke of gratitude toward investigators who refused to let the case fade. Yet sorrow accompanied relief. Crane had once been part of the same professional circle, trusted as a physician and neighbor. His implication struck at the town's sense of cohesion. Interviews captured the duality, acknowledgement that justice required accountability, paired with mourning that a familiar figure could stand accused. Ellen Mercer released a short statement, expressing thanks for persistence and asking for privacy. In local shops and churches, conversation shifted from questions of what happened to questions of why. Some speculated about motives rooted in finances, others in personal grievances. Detectives declined to elaborate beyond what evidence confirmed. The community settled into a quiet watchfulness, waiting for courts to complete the process. For the first time in years, the narrative had moved forward, but resolution required more than an arrest. It required judgment delivered under law, not speculation whispered in town. The trial began in late 2015, drawing steady but restrained attention. Prosecutors presented a case built on timeline analysis, financial records, and forensic evidence. Jurors heard about the business dispute, the civil case, and the sudden resolution after Mercer's disappearance. They examined the phone record placing Crane near the clinic on the critical night. Most significant, they reviewed the DNA profile from the coffee mug. Expert witnesses explained methods and safeguards, stressing the reliability of the match. Defense attorneys countered by challenging chain of custody and suggesting possible cross-contamination, but documentation proved robust. Throughout proceedings, the courtroom maintained quiet order. Reporters described the tone as methodical, lacking theatrics. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated for 2 days. Their verdict was clear: guilty of homicide. For those who had waited nearly 2 decades, the decision carried both weight and finality. It closed the central question of responsibility, though not the deeper questions of motive. Crane showed little reaction as the verdict was read. The courtroom, filled with family and community members, remained subdued, as if years of waiting allowed no space for outburst. The resolution was solemn, not celebratory. Sentencing followed swiftly. The judge imposed life imprisonment, citing both the gravity of the crime and the years of uncertainty it imposed on the community. Crane's legal team pursued appeals, but higher courts upheld the decision, finding evidence sufficient and procedures sound. The process concluded with quiet finality. For the Mercer family, the judgment brought an end to formal proceedings. Ellen described the experience as a release from limbo, though not from grief. For Fairview, the sentence marked the closing of a chapter that had shadowed its streets for years. Local papers published retrospectives, recounting the timeline from 1998 disappearance to 2015 conviction. The tone across articles was consistent, respectful, restrained, focused on persistence rather than sensation. The outcome did not erase sorrow, but it affirmed accountability. Crane would remain imprisoned, his role in the community replaced by a void of trust. The trial's conclusion allowed Fairview to move forward, though traces of the long mystery lingered in memory. Justice had been served, but absence left its own lasting mark. In the years after the trial, the clinic resumed new life. Renovations completed the conversion into a general medical office, staffed by physicians unconnected to the earlier history. Inside the waiting area, a plaque honoring Dr. Mercer was mounted by the door. It bore his name, dates of life, and the words, "In service to community." For staff and patients, it served as quiet acknowledgement of what had once transpired within those walls. The building, once a symbol of uncertainty, became a place of care once more. For the Mercer family, visits to the town grew less frequent, though on anniversaries they sometimes returned to see the plaque and reconnect with old friends. Residents described the presence of the memorial as balancing, a reminder of loss, but also of the respect Mercer had earned. In a subtle way, the plaque shifted the story. The clinic was no longer only about disappearance, but also about endurance and memory. Over time, Fairview adapted. The case that had once unsettled daily routines became part of history, its conclusion marked not by erasure, but by remembrance.